I opened the door of the house where I grew up in and felt the odd aroma of dust rush into my nose. The first step I take makes a rickety board beneath me creak eerily. I make my way towards the stairs and begin to walk up them. The entire house was only a shell of the once lively abode that previously stood. Only a distant memory of good times and bad. Only a reminder to me of the train man. One day, when I was just a boy, and I still lived in that house, me and my brother decided to investigate a treehouse my mother briefly mentioned that our uncle had built out in the woods. I entered the woods that day not knowing what I would find, or who I would see. We roamed an old trail for close to an hour before the surroundings around us became greatly unfamiliar. I knew not to panic, so not to frighten my younger brother, I quickly began to assess the situation. All around us, tall trees stood, peeking through the clouds and faintly touching heaven. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a wooden building in the trees, and without acknowledging my brother, I began to walk towards it. There sat a treehouse in the forest, high in the sky, ever so powerful. We climbed the ladder on the tree, and entered the treehouse. Inside the walls were posters that my uncle told stories of. The ground was full of toys and the childhood. On a desk inside sat magazines and books almost falling apart from age. I noticed one of the books was a private notebook my uncle left behind. Everything in here was full of wonder to me, and my brother thought of this place as a very own sanctuary, our very own Mount Olympus. Our mission ended as quickly as it began, with my mother's voice beckoning through the trees for us to return home. Me and my brother slowly left the place where my uncle's childhood lives, and I allowed my younger sibling to race ahead of me home as I slowly walked toward the back of my house. The faint crushing of leaves behind me startled me beyond comprehension. I spun around swiftly to see only the trees on the cold, dead ground. I shot my eyes all around the area and saw nothing until I looked back at my uncle's treehouse. In the small window hole, I saw a glimpse of a man, more than 3 times my age, staring down at me, hauntingly. Dark, dead black eyes, wild hair held back only by a train conductor's hat, and dark green disgusting teeth that slowly grew into a grisly smile. The train man's grin threw me backwards and made me trip onto a tree root. I could barely climb the tree back onto my feet to sprint back towards my house, not even daring to look back at the demon that lived in my uncle's past. Over at my house, I hugged my mother harder and with more fear in me than ever before. And when I told her about the train man, she got angry with me and told me never to bring him up again. I stood there, shocked that she would ignore my childhood fear so evilly, and to do little to console me on the traumatic experience that I just dealt with. My brother looked at me like I was crazy and did not believe me when I told him there was a man in our uncle's treehouse. I was worried that I had not really seen the train man, and I did not really see a figure ominously smiling at me from an old treehouse. I was worried that I was crazy, but even more so that he was going to get me. While fear blocked most of the thoughts in my mind about the train man, curiosity also lurked within me. I wondered if my uncle knew about the train man, if my mother secretly knew about the train man. I had no proof of his existence, but maybe something in the treehouse could help me in discovering more about him. It took almost 2 weeks for me to even pull together enough courage to even step foot inside the deep, mysterious woods behind my house. But when I did, an invisible force made me continue onwards toward the treehouse. I had no memory of how I had to get there, but somehow I found my way through the shadows of the trees. I stood under the treehouse, and it looked down on me like a powerful demon, ready to strike my well-being at any moment. I cautiously climbed the ladder with my eyes closed tight, my hands gripping the old wood for dear life. As soon as my head breached the floor's entry hole, my eyes opened, and the world I had entered once before made itself aware to me. My first instinct was to go to the desk and open my uncle's private notebook. I pulled out a random page and saw writings of my uncle had made. They explained things he did and saw, dreams he had and wanted, and told a tale of an experience not so different from my own. My uncle wrote that he and his friend Toby saw a homeless man sitting on railroad tracks in the road drinking beer and rambling to himself. They stared at him curiously and laughed when he began to doze off. When he saw them, he got aggressive and threw his bottle at them. They sprinted back into the forest and went back to the safety of my uncle's house. My uncle called him the train man, which is where I first thought to call him that. A simple name, I thought, for a human so really frightening. At the time, I had no proof that the man my uncle saw was the man that I saw in that treehouse. But I knew that he was in fact the train man. While back reading a notebook, I heard a raspy cough and distorted laugh beneath the treehouse. My heart began to beat faster as the butterflies inside my chest. A warm fear started to spread. I did not dare go towards the exit hole. I started to look for something in terms of protection. I looked in a box beneath the desk and found a small pocket knife and pulled it out, and as fast as I could. As soon as I got the knife in my hand in a protective position, years of rust forced the blade to fall off of the handle and slide through the cracks in the floor. After a moment had passed, a loud and evil cackle shot at me, and the sounds of crumbling leaves started towards the ladder. I could hear nothing else besides the man climbing that ladder. I got into a corner and pretended to look dead. I didn't know what to do. What was he going to do to me, and what might fate the train man had on me? I pulled myself into a small ball and began to sob deeply. Maybe he won't hurt me because I'm only a kid, I thought. Maybe he'll show some mercy. I heard the creaks of each board being stepped on, and the excited and worn breathing of the train man slowly coming towards me. The train man got up through the floor and stood. My eyes were so tight that I couldn't see anything, but I could feel his presence as if it was my own. I felt his step on the ground fiercely towards me, and could smell its disgusting, dank aroma. I pictured him holding a bottle of beer, wearing his old hat, cloaking himself in an old constructor's uniform. All the while, his deep marble black eyes stared at me. His terrifying smile showed the dark green teeth sitting on his jaws. The train man grabbed my neck, in the back of my neck, and held me up like a prize. He gripped my throat hard and stopped me from breathing. He pulled my face level to look at his own and croaked, "Look at me, boy. I am the train man." He bellowed this again and again until I finally spread my eyes open and stared into his black, dead marbles. "Know me, fear me, and always remember me." The train man's voice transferred onto my face like a blanket of musk and forced me to cough fearfully. "Who am I?" the train man said with this look of absolute hate in his eyes, in the face of death, claiming another soul. "Who am I? Answer me now, boy." I slowly told him what he wanted to hear, what I dreaded having to say. The train man. Train's man evil grin returned, and he dropped me on the floor with a thud. I began to cry deeply, shut my eyes again. Above me, the train man's deep laugh rocked my head into a daze, and I began to drift off into a sleep. When I awoke, it was dark, and the only light was from the moon, gleaming softly out the window. Through the trees, I stood up and walked over to the desk to retrieve my uncle's notebook. As I walked home, I could constantly hear the rustling of leaves and the sounds of loud footsteps. But none of this would scare me. Nothing could ever be more frightening. And looking into the large, deep, dark, lifeless black eyes of the train man. At that moment, I promised to myself to never return to the treehouse. To never again open my uncle's notebook. I took the notebook and I hid it under a floorboard in my attic, and made sure nobody would ever find it again. That day was a long time ago, more than 20 years. Now I stand in the hallway of the house where I grew up, looking at the door to the room where I slept, and made sure not to stay here long, to only do what I had to do and leave. Looking up from the hall, I see the small cord that connects the attic door, and I pull it. Almost like a magic staircase, it appears from the ceiling. I climb up the stairs and walk towards the spot where I hid the notebook under the floorboard. After pulling off the board and digging my hand through the darkness, I pull out my uncle's notebook. I glance out the window and see the sun's faintly setting through the trees. I don't have much time, I thought, and I opened the notebook to the first page. Nothing concerning the train man was here, or on the next page, or the next. I keep flipping through, looking for a picture that is drawn of the train man. I see it. It is the train man sitting against a tree, drinking and holding a knife. Behind the tree, a pair of small legs are just jutting out, and a pool of blood beginning to form from them. The page after the picture is something my uncle wrote, a story about him and my mother walking through the woods with a friend of theirs. The other day, when me and Mitchell were walking down to the lake, this boy named Jared asked us if we wanted to see something cool. Mitchell was kind of nervous about it, but I told her it would be fine, and we walked with Jared to the railroad tracks and that entered the forest. We walked along it for a few minutes before Jared told us to go this way, and he made us go into the one part of the woods. I started to get a little scared when he said this. But I didn't want Jared to think I was a baby, so I went along with him. After a minute, Jared told us to be quiet and showed us the small wooden house on the ground. We slowly crept over to it, and Jared told us to look inside of the window on the outside of it. Inside, on a small dirty mattress, was the train man that me and Toby saw before, drinking on the railroad tracks. I don't know why, but this scared me. I almost started to cry. And Jared pulled out a match, and he lit it. Tossed it into the window, and Jared told us to run over and wait behind a tree. We did. And after a moment, smoke began to come out through the windows. Jared could not stop laughing. Michelle started to cry. No, Mitchell started to cry. I didn't know what to do, so I just started to grab Mitchell's arm and slowly back away. Suddenly, the train man ran out of his hut with a knife in his hand. He started to look around. Jared's laughing and Mitchell's crying gave us away immediately, and he ran over to us. Me and Mitchell ran away, but Jared, well, just stood there, laughing. Mitchell ran to the train tracks, but I stayed there and watched the train man grab onto Jared's throat and slam him hard against a tree. Jared's feet were kicking, but he did not scream. I could not see his face, but I assumed he was as scared as I was. The train man then rummaged through Jared's pockets and pulled out a matchbook and crumpled it in his hand. The train man, still holding Jared by the throat, carried him over to a burning hut and tossed him inside. The train man wielding his knife and then went inside after him. When I saw this, I ran away back towards the train tracks with Mitchell. After reading this, I realized that the train man used to be just a homeless man living in the forest, but during my childhood, became something spirit-like and more evil than before. Through the book, there were multiple tables of encounters with him, written by both my mother and my uncle. My mother had known about the train man, I thought. I flipped to the very last written page in the notebook and found something my mother had written. It was written very sloppily and was almost illegible. Adam is dead. The train man killed him. We went back to see what happened to Jared, and we saw the train man's dead body in the ash of his hut. He came back to life. He got up from the ash and killed him with his knife. I couldn't do anything. He was so big. I'm telling Mom and everyone that Adam drowned in the lake, and the river took him away. Nobody would ever believe me. I'm writing this so somebody knows, so somebody won't get killed by the train man. I close the notebook and stand up. It's dark now. The moon is out, and it's full. The heavy night is making itself very aware of me. I leave the house and head towards the woods where the train man lives. Even though it's been over 20 years, I know how to get to the treehouse just as easily as I did the first time I walked there. I walked over every branch, every pile of leaves without a problem. And slowly the building at the top of the trees became present. What had once looked like Mount Olympus now looked like fires of Hades. And without hesitation, I climbed the ladder up the tree. I set the notebook on the ground and got out my lighter. I looked around the corner of the treehouse and saw in the corner of my eye an empty bottle of beer. Behind me are two familiar sounds of the train man's laughter, filled me with ancient dread. I turn around and there he stands, the same dirty train conductor's outfit. the same old barely holding back his aggressive, unkept hair, and the same evil smirk shining brightly beneath those two pitch-black eyes. I quickly rushed to the floor where the notebook lay and retrieved it. The train man pulled out his knife from his overalls, puts it in a slashing position. I take the notebook and turn the light up beneath it. This does little to slow the train man down. He slices my left arm, making me drop the notebook to the floor and making me fall backwards. The train man's foot comes crashing down on my face, and I think my nose breaks. I can feel warm blood flowing from it. Then I see his foot come down again. I'm in a great daze at this moment, but still sober enough to see the notebook over in the corner. I feel the lighter burning. I feel the lighter being gripped tightly within my fist. I turn over to my stomach and start to crawl over towards it. I get up off the ground, but I'm suddenly stopped by the train man's blade piercing my side. I can't decide what hurts more. My arm, my nose, my side. But I don't try to think about any of what and keep making my way towards the notebook. The train man begins to laugh loudly at me, and then bellow, "You can't kill the train man, boy. No one can kill the train man." I ignore this and keep on towards the book. Just barely within my reach, I grab it and begin to burn a corner of it with my lighter. After a second, it catches flame, and a small fire starts to grow from it. I turn around from the ground to look up at the train man and see my eerie delight. The train man's uniform began to catch ember. The train man's face had lost its smile, and his dead eyes grew to have more life than ever. I take the lighter and start to burn around the corner, and suddenly the train man's face starts to burn. Some of his skin starts to peel off. The train man stumbles back into the corner, and just as the fires in the notebook grew, in the center of it, a hot fire engulfs the train man. The train man burned fierce, fully before my eyes, and I couldn't believe that this is the way he would kill him. From the ground, I slowly stand up and grab the knife from the train man's hand, and I stab him in the heart. The knife stays in his chest, and the fire inside of him turns the train man's eyes to a dark blood red. And right before the train man turned to ash, he looks at me and smiles. I leave the treehouse and walk towards my old house without looking back, without being afraid of him coming back. Back at the house, I get into my car and sit there before I drive away from my old house. Before I leave, a collection of childhoods, and I say goodbye to the train man.